Once upon a time, in the heart of a bitter winter, a beautiful queen sat sewing by the tall, ebony-framed window of her castle chamber. Snow fell softly outside, blanketing the world in pure, white silence. As she worked, the needle suddenly pricked her finger. A single drop of bright red blood fell onto the snow gathered on the windowsill. The queen gazed at the striking contrast, crimson against white, and whispered to herself, "Oh, how I wish for a daughter with skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony." Her wish came true sooner than she could have imagined. In the spring that followed, a baby girl was born, perfect in every way, skin like fresh snow, lips like ripe berries, and hair dark as a raven's wing. The king and queen named her Snow White. But joy was fleeting. Shortly after the birth, the gentle queen fell ill and passed away, leaving the king heartbroken and the tiny princess motherless. A year later, the king married again. His new queen was breathtakingly beautiful, with sharp features, pale skin, and a crown that sparkled like ice. Yet beneath her stunning exterior lay a heart cold with pride and jealousy. She could not bear the thought of anyone surpassing her in beauty. In her private chamber stood a magic mirror, framed in gold and enchanted to speak only truth. Every morning the queen would stand before it and ask, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" And every morning the mirror replied, in its deep, echoing voice, "You, my queen, are the fairest of all." The queen would smile, satisfied, and go about her day. But time passed, and Snow White grew. By the age of 7, her beauty had blossomed beyond imagining, innocent, radiant, and pure. One winter morning, when the queen asked her usual question, the mirror's answer changed. "You, my queen, are fair, 'tis true, but Snow White 1,000 times fairer than you." The queen's face twisted with rage. Jealousy burned inside her like poison. She summoned her most trusted huntsman and gave him a terrible command. "Take the child deep into the forest," she hissed. "Kill her, and as proof, bring me back her heart." The huntsman bowed and led the innocent princess into the dark woods under the pretense of a pleasant walk. Snow White, trusting and kind, followed without fear. Deep among the ancient trees, the huntsman raised his knife, but when he looked into her wide, frightened eyes, his hand trembled. He could not do it. "Run, child," he whispered urgently. "Run far away and never return. The queen must believe you are dead." Tears streaming down her face, Snow White fled deeper into the forest. She ran until her legs ached and the sun began to set. Exhausted and terrified, she stumbled upon a tiny cottage nestled in a clearing. The door was unlocked. Inside, she found everything miniature. 7 little chairs around a small table set with 7 little plates and cups, and upstairs 7 little beds. Hungry and weary, Snow White tasted a bit from each plate and sipped from each cup. Then, too tired to go on, she curled up across the 7 beds and fell fast asleep. When evening came, the dwarves returned, who worked in the mountains mining diamonds and gold. They lit their 7 lanterns and immediately noticed something was amiss. "Someone's been sitting in my chair," said the first. "Someone's been eating my soup," said the second. "And someone's been sleeping in my bed," cried the 7th, discovering Snow White still there. The dwarves gathered around in wonder as the girl stirred and woke. When she saw them, she was frightened at first, but their kind faces soon put her at ease. Trembling, she told them her story about the wicked stepmother who wanted her dead. The dwarves listened with growing sympathy. When she finished, they spoke as one. "You may stay with us. You'll be safe here. Just keep our house tidy, cook our meals, and whatever you do, never open the door to strangers." Snow White gratefully agreed, and life in the little cottage became joyful. Every morning the dwarves marched off to the mines, singing as they went, warning her once more, "Beware, Snow White, the queen will discover you're alive." Back at the castle, the queen, confident of her victory, approached the mirror again. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all? You, my queen, are fair, it is true, but Snow White, living beyond the 7 mountain with the 7 dwarves, is still 1,000 times fairer than you. Fury consumed the queen. She paced her chamber, plotting. At last she disguised herself as an old peddler woman, her face wrinkled and her voice raspy. She crafted a magical laced bodice, beautiful but deadly. With it she made her way to the dwarves' cottage. She knocked on the door. "Pretty laces for sale, fine laces for a pretty girl." Snow White called from inside, "I'm sorry, I cannot let anyone in." "But you may look from the window, dearie," the old woman coaxed sweetly. Snow White peeked out. The laces were indeed lovely. Against her better judgment, she allowed the woman to tighten the bodice around her waist. The queen pulled with all her might, cutting off Snow White's breath. The princess gasped and fell lifeless to the floor. The queen fled, laughing wickedly. That evening the dwarves returned and found Snow White collapsed. In panic, they loosened the lace, and slowly breath returned to her body. When she revived, she told them what had happened. "That was no peddler," the dwarves warned gravely. "That was the queen. Promise us, never speak to strangers again." Snow White promised, but the queen was not finished. Back at the castle, the mirror revealed that Snow White still lived and remained the fairest. Enraged, the queen devised a second plan, a poisoned comb, gleaming and irresistible. Disguised differently this time, she returned to the cottage. "Beautiful combs for your lovely hair." Again, Snow White resisted at first, but the temptation proved too strong. She let the woman comb her hair, and the moment the poisoned teeth touched her scalp, she fell once more. Again, the dwarves arrived in time, removed the comb, and revived her. Their warnings grew sterner. "Be more careful, the queen will not stop." The third time, the queen brewed her most cunning weapon, an apple, shining red on one side and pure white on the other. Only the red half was laced with deadly poison. Disguised as a kindly farmer's wife, she approached the cottage. "Fresh apples, my dear, so sweet and juicy. Here, I'll cut one in half. You take the red side, I'll take the white. See? Perfectly safe." Snow White hesitated, remembering the warnings, but the woman's smile was so warm and the apple looked so delicious, she took a single bite of the red half. Instantly she collapsed, seemingly dead. The queen hurried away, triumphant at last. When the dwarves came home that night, no amount of shaking or calling could wake Snow White. Heartbroken, they wept over her still form. She looked as peaceful and beautiful as if merely sleeping. Unable to bear burying her in the cold earth, they built a coffin of glass and placed it on a hilltop glade where wildflowers would bloom in spring. One dwarf always remained on watch day and night. Word of the beautiful maiden in the glass coffin spread through the kingdom. One day, a handsome prince rode through the forest and came upon the sight. Struck to the core by Snow White's beauty, he dismounted and approached the dwarves. "Please," he begged, voice thick with emotion, "let me take her to my palace. I will honor and cherish her memory forever." The dwarves, moved by his sincerity and seeing the depth of his love, agreed. As the prince's servants carefully lifted the coffin, one stumbled on a root. The jolt dislodged the piece of poisoned apple lodged in Snow White's throat. She coughed, gasped, and opened her eyes. "Where am I?" she whispered weakly. The prince knelt beside her, overjoyed. "You are safe, and if you will have me, you shall be my queen." Snow White smiled, her heart full. "Yes," she answered softly. A magnificent wedding was planned, and invitations were sent far and wide, including, unknowingly, to the wicked queen. Before attending, the queen consulted her mirror one final time. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?"
You, my queen, are fair, but the young queen at the prince's side is fairer still." Blinded by rage, the queen attended the celebration anyway. There her fate awaited. As punishment for her crimes, she was forced to wear red-hot iron shoes and dance until she could dance no more. She collapsed at last, never to rise again. Snow White and the prince ruled their kingdom with kindness, wisdom, and love. The 7 dwarfs were always honored guests at the castle, welcomed with open arms and endless gratitude. And so, in the land where winter once brought sorrow, spring returned forever. They lived happily ever after.